Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the South America podcast, from the Andes to the Amazon, and almost to Antarctica. Today, we are in none of these regions because we have another special guest here to talk to us about the great expanse of plains in where? Venezuela and Colombia. Special guest, please introduce yourself. Who are you and why do you come to talk to us today?
Hi, Austin. Thank you for having me. My name is Silvana Saturno, and yes, I'm a social anthropologist, currently independent researcher. I work in the Colombian and Venezuelan Llanos, this eco-region that we share binational, and I work with indigenous people living in the Venezuelan side of the Colombian-Venezuelan Llanos. They are called Pumé people, but they were before they were known as Yaruro, and maybe it's more present in the literature of the last century, this name, and maybe more familiar for our listeners. But
Indeed, I gave it a quick Google to check this as well, and indeed, this Yaruro did come up much more frequently, including in the Wikipedia. But it redirects to Pumé. So,
yes.
as I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, the Pumé is the auto designation. It's how they actually call
Yeah,
themselves.
that's how they call themselves, and that would mean what for us is human.
Hmm.
It's more complicated than that, but let's say that that's their definition of humanity or of how they in like the antonymous to Pume would be Nive, which is non-human,
I see.
or and it's the name for spirits, but also for non-indigenous people for Venezuelan citizens and Colombian citizens, non-indigenous citizens.
I see. And
Yeah.
this is quite common, isn't it, to have the kind of human or true human designation be we the people,
Yes.
many indigenous names, not just in South America, but also all over Eurasia, actually, etc.
Yes.
This
And
is
what's
quite common.
interesting is that, according to many of my Pume collaborators, that Yaruro is a name given by Wahibo speakers in the region, and it means witch or sorcerer.
I see. So this is a neighboring group giving them this name as kind of
Yes,
almost slanderous description. This
yes,
community is
and
full of witches. These people are all
exactly.
sorcerers.
And I think that during colonial time and early 20th century, that was the name because maybe the Wahibu speaking people were closer to the people in the state structures, or in the Pume were always very at the margins, and that's why they were called like this.
I see. So let's take a step back though, because this is very interesting. We've gone right into the thick of it. But as I say, going back a bit, how does one get to study a group like this? So
Oh,
perhaps you could say a little bit about your academic formation and how you ended up
yeah, I
working
can do
with
that.
such people.
So the Pumé, as you might know, are not well known. And I ended up in this area because I did my bachelor in biology. Um, and that was my first job as a biologist. I was working in the area in a conservation program for two endangered species, the Arrow turtle and the Orinoco crocodile.
Mm,
And I was working in this program, and most of the people who were part of the staff were Pume people. And I got to hear the language, and that was my first time I heard an indigenous language in my country. And I was amazed by that because I grew up monolingual and in a very monolingual context, even though we have so many languages in Venezuela. But let's say in the cities, you are not aware of the fact that there are so many indigenous languages being spoken in the Amazon or in the Orinoco Basin, or even uh, in Maracaibo and the like western part of Venezuela. Um, yes, and I
absolutely.
think that, sorry.
Absolutely, yeah. It's something that I think many people who aren't familiar with the region would also have. But as you say, people from cities, etc., it's sort of taken for granted
Mhm.
that, say, in the case of Venezuela, Colombia, etc., Spanish is this dominant language, and not only is this great biodiversity, but there's this huge cultural diversity in many of these regions. And indeed,
Yeah.
many studies seem to find that they're linked, that biodiversity and linguistic diversity seem to go hand in hand, which is
Yes.
fascinating.
Yes, and then I think that was the what really captivated me. At the time, I was working for the government, and there was a guy making a documentary about the Pumé and their lives. And I got to be with him editing and translating and like writing the subtitles with other Pumé collaborators. And so I decided that I wanted to know more about them. And then I registered for the master's in anthropology. That's how I started doing this, yes.
Amazing. And where did you do that master's in anthropology?
Where
Yeah,
or
where?
when? Where? In Venezuela, at the Venezuelan Institute for Scientific Research, IVIC. And back then I was very much into indigenous agricultural practices. And the Pumé are typically described as hunter and gatherers. They actually sometimes described as survivors of the Paleolithic time.
Mm,
And I wasn't so happy about this.
right.
And most of my research was documenting other subsistence practices they have and they have always had. Um, Mostly agriculture, but I did my master's in ethnobotany
Hmm.
and ethnoecology. So I was also documenting their categories for plants and for animals, and also for where we tried to document also if they had categories that could be like ecosystems, like how, like if they have like the forest and the freshwater ecosystem, and that this kind of like terms that we have. It was very ecology centered, my research, when I started. I was cognitive anthropology a little bit too. But then during my field research, of course, I had so many questions that I had to um, dig in a little bit more. And then that's how I kept going there. And this curiosity led me to do like a PhD in anthropology with another question, another research question, or other research questions in plural.
Of
And yes,
course.
that's how it started. Yeah.
That's fascinating. So I really want to zoom in on that actually. So I think it's well known, many people will think, oh, classification, classification of plants and animals. Okay,
Hmm.
we say that this is a tree, maybe that this is perhaps a spirit, or there are two types of trees, depending on in Machigenga culture, for instance, in southern Peru, is this more animate? Does this tree somehow move or affect things in the world?
Hmm.
And I think
Hmm.
people even think in these terms. Maybe
Yeah.
lay people think, okay, I can understand this, but this whole notion of do even these abstract concepts of something like an ecosystem, which we take so for granted in
Yes.
science, do these exist in the same way, or is there a different conception amongst different cultures? Is also
Yeah.
yeah, very engaging and fascinating. And what did you find? Was there kind of some conclusion on that front?
Well, I am coming to the conclusion right now.
Oh, well, really? Sorry, sorry
Years,
to interrupt the
years
flow, but
after that, or now I have a hint to the conclusion, because back then I was relying a lot of on drawings,
mm,
and I kind of had like this terminology, but I had also the impression that they didn't make sense for them. And then during my research, the last time I was there was in 2019, where I was for 1 year. Um, and I had other questions or other research questions, but it came out that I don't know if you're familiar with the category of the master owner of different resources, let's say, like there is the master of the peccary, that's very famous one, and then the hunter has to negotiate and to be able to hunt, right?
I see. And a peccary, we should say, for people who don't know, is a sort of wild pig.
Exactly. And this idea of the master has been deeply theorized in the Amazon or in the lowlands of South America, which I'm not so sure if the Pumé really fit into the Amazonian categories, but they fit to some extent, let's say. But yeah, so the idea of the master or owner of the freshwater fauna kept coming up in our conversations. And now I have been reflecting a lot about this, and I think that's actually what we call a freshwater ecosystem.
I see.
Because these guys, these owners, they have these multi-species or multi-specific, let's say, objects or possessions. What from the Puma perspective is our objects, are turtles or fish or caimans or different. So they are perspectival. They live in a perspectival world, and
this would map on in some way to our notion of kind of species that all inhabit a freshwater ecosystem and interact in this kind of way. This is kind of what you're saying. The ownership is of the owner of the freshwater fauna. That they sort of see it in an equivalent way to if you say, okay, someone works with freshwater fauna in Western culture, okay, it means, rivers, it means fish, it means, and we have this kind of vague notion of an ecosystem, even if we're not ecologists, of course.
It's the biotic and abiotic elements of the body, the water bodies that we call freshwater ecosystems. But in this case would be the water spirits and their houses and underwater cities, and then their objects, which is, for example, from the Puma perspective, are turtles. From the water spirits perspective, are pots where they eat, or fish from the water spirits perspective are like corn fields that they grow. And this is the kind of things that I'm now interested in, and I'm working on this. And that's why I'm thinking, when I went there for the first time with all of my categories and trying to fit into these categories, their categories, I now understand that it doesn't make any sense. Yes, and
right, that effectively that different cultures around the world conceive of reality in different ways. We're all humans, and we all kind of come into a reality, but how this is set up and how the systems for conceiving of this are indeed can be quite different across the world.
yes.
So you can't just mesh the two together.
No, sometimes I think there are equivalents, but we have to work or sort out the differences and understand this. They're sometimes very subtle, but we cannot try to come up with exactly the same categories across cultures. This is, I think, was one of the failures of ethnoecology or this project, this huge project of cognitive anthropology, that sometimes we want to find the same we have, and it's not possible. Very often it's not possible.
Excellent. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Austin Howard, the creator of the South America podcast, from the Andes to the Amazon and almost to Antarctica. I love doing this, and I love reaching as many people as possible. So, in that spirit, if you could help out, do your part, give a thumbs up to the video, and indeed if you can subscribe to the larger documentalist channel, that would help me reach more people. Thank you very much. So we've said some really fascinating things about kind of the different conceptions of ecology, but I think you've also worked on something called historical distance. Was this was during the PhD phase? This was the product of your PhD, as I understand?
Yes, exactly. So while I was there, I just had this question that I wanted to know how much they remembered of their past. Because one thing that is fascinating, I think is common to all the people in the lowlands, is that they don't usually talk about colonial time in an explicit way, right? They use a lot of metaphors and to refer to this time. And I just wanted to do research on that to know where were the what I called at the end, or yes, I decided to call them modes of historical consciousness. They have different ways to remember, not only one. And also, well, because they are usually oral cultures, they don't have written histories. That's also the question: how do they remember, or how accurate it is what they transmit from one generation to the other? And this is always also a common place to think about indigenous societies of the lowlands of South America as people who don't remember. As I think that's these societies are what Levi-Strauss called the cold societies, right? The people who don't have history and don't remember far of the last generation. Maybe they don't remember anything that happened before.
Another extreme conception being perhaps Dan Everett and with the Piraha in Brazil saying, these are people of the present. They can remember things, but it's not culturally important to talk about the past. Whereas I find, certainly in Western Amazonia, in my work, that people do have perhaps maybe longer memories, but this, as you say, this starts to blur the line between the Andean world maybe and the lowland world as such. But as I understand, this can be a point of some controversy, and I think this is also partly what your work seeks to engage with, this controversy. Is this an accurate picture?
Well, as far as I could see, it's not so accurate. I think they remember a lot of what happened in ways that probably are not so easy to understand. For example, I did research on dreams, and so maybe the long story is they have a ritual which is called the Tonhe ritual that they perform almost on a daily basis in different places, because I worked in two different communities and they are arranged by extended families, and each extended family has a plaza to perform this ritual, right? So in one of the communities, we had 3 of this plaza, and the other community, it is a neighbor community to this one, they had another plaza. So almost every night, one of these extended families organized one tonhe. And so, yes, and this ritual is for the spirits who were their ancestors to come to this realm and talk about things, problems like social issues, but also people who were sick were healed with their help. Although it's not so easy to draw a line between being sick or being socially I don't know, when people withdraw socially, it's also a form of illness.
I see. So it's kind of
So
seen as kind of the health of the individual within the society. So when people
yes,
withdraw, it's seen as kind of almost a disturbance to that
yes,
system.
people who are depressed, which what we call depression,
Right.
and this when you don't want to work, when you don't want to interact with people, and you isolate yourself, and this is a typical disease, let's say, among the Pumé.
So they conceive of it more. That's conceived as an illness. That's conceived as a
Exactly.
yes.
Uh,
I see.
and it's related to the soul being kidnapped by one of the gods, which is the trickster, that also a very common figure in the lowlands. And so this is one of the first things that I saw. It's that this trickster figure, who is usually appears in dreams, and it appears in dreams, and then people are sick, right? They become ill. Also because there is not a very strict line between dreaming and wake life. It's like it's connected. It doesn't have a separation. So typically this guy who now appears in dreams as a cattle rancher or as a military man, uh, very violent, then he put people to work constantly, and they suffer in the dreams, and then their symptoms in wake life is that they don't want to work, or they feel like don't want to talk and just stay home, and this is perceived as illness. And in the
Wait,
Tonhe, sorry.
just to interject, just to ask. So when you say a rancher or a military person, so these would be non-Pume people. So it appears
Typically,
in the guise of kind of a foreigner from their perspective.
yes, like I said, to describe or to name these people, they use nive, which is the word that is not Pume.
Right.
But of course, this word is also, I don't see as a noun, but as a modifier of, because also the spirits, even if they are benevolent spirits, as like this one who helped the shaman to heal or retrieve the soul of the person who has been kidnapped by Ichai, the trickster, they are also nive in
I
the
see.
sense that they are others, right? They are not us. This name or this word, which comes after the name, to indicate that if it's a human or real person, or if it's a person who is not human, right?
I see. And these, so yeah, the trickster takes on the guise of is in a spirit form, therefore non-human, therefore potentially foreign, therefore nive. I see.
Exactly. Yes. Exactly.
I beg your pardon. Excuse me. But going off of this, which I think is quite interesting, is what if, just thinking aloud here, what if somebody who is not from the group, not a Pumé person, marries someone who is Pumé? One, is this frequent? And two, if this does happen, when it happens, if they have children, are these children, Pumé or are they Nive?
That's another interesting thing, is that the Pumé are very, like, say, restrictive in their way of perceiving other humans,
I see.
but at the same time very open to integrate them through commensality, for example. Uh, Marriage could be a way to integrate Nive or others. But in my experience, typically Pume women marry non-indigenous men, but Pumé men don't marry
Non-indigenous women,
non-indigenous women,
or
typically.
non-Pumé women at least.
Non-Pumé women, yes. I haven't ever seen this in my
Interesting.
experience. And in my experience, I think 2 women I saw who married non-indigenous men. And I think that's accepted and fully integrated in the kids as well, because one thing that makes you Pumé, let's say, and in my experience, because I was called Niveni, which is the female form of Nive. And when people approached me to say, no, you are a Pumeni now, it was because I was feeding people. Basically, when I was feeding kids, I was cooking and feeding, I was told I now am a Pumeni and not anymore an Iveni.
So could this partly explain why having a mother who is Pumé is kind of perhaps in this framework more important because it's seen maybe as more nurturing, more motherly. Therefore, you are sustaining the community somehow. You are therefore one of us, if we can put it in these terms.
Yes. I think another part of this is that Pumé women don't speak Spanish at all, whereas men do.
Right.
So the way to transmit the language is basically through mothers, which is all over the world, to be honest. But I think women are more closed or less willing to open to non-indigenous society. And somehow paradoxically, they are the ones who marry.
Right.
But I think it's because Pumé, non-indigenous men also have access to more like resources and money, cash, and this kind of stuff, which I don't think a Pumé man can have the same access to these things, can marry a non-indigenous woman. This also, I think, plays a huge role in these marriages, but I don't know. I cannot say that for sure. Another thing is that I think in the past, when the Llanos was populated by many, many other indigenous groups, which is not the case right now, it was also the marriages between groups was mostly Pumé women married other groups. That was also the case. So it's not something new from what I can see.
I see that. Well, that's fascinating. And so you think this also perhaps ties in a little bit to this kind of notion of historical distance at all, or how do we get back to this? Because we've strayed a little from historical distance.
Yes,
How do we wrap this back into that? It's certainly very interesting, and thank you for indulging that curiosity of mine, because I do some work on intermarriage and such topics, so I'm happy to discuss it. But yes, I did ask about historical distance, about the kind of heart of your PhD studies, and perhaps it's worth migrating back.
We can go back to this, what we talked about, and Western categories and disciplines of research. And in this case, maybe that was my past talking, I had the question, so how these people remember, what are the ways that they bring the past into the present and how they talk about the past and these things, right? And once I had all the data, that was not at the beginning, I started to realize that they had this historical distance, which is a concept I came across with when I was researching on historical consciousness from the perspective of the historians in history as discipline, right? And all the controversies that exist around this, because so typically Western societies, they have historical consciousness, and therefore we have history that is an objective discipline, and they are very accurate and neutral. to the past, right? And they can analyze it and put it. But at the same time, collective memory or social memory was perceived or is perceived in Western society as not having a historical consciousness, right? And one of the things that plays a central role in the work of a historian is their ability to detach from the past, right? And the way to detach from the past is having this metaphor of distance. So the past is there, and one of the things first, the idea of pastness, that there is a past that no longer exists and is like bounded, and we can go back only by reading sources and analyzing them in a very neutral way, right? And the only possibility of being neutral is by having a distance between us and this past.
So,
And the Pumé, well, they also have a distance to the past, because I was trying to go into what they remember, right? And then they have this story about how their ancestors were what they called Tío Pumé, which were Tío is a word that I think means spirit. And then Pumé, because they were these spirit-like beings who were in the Pumé territory in primordial time. And they were people who had a living very much to similar to what they desire maybe now. So the Pumé people are they suffer a lot of diseases and they die very often, and they have very dramatic, very, very strong relationships to illness in general, like malaria or many different kinds of illnesses, and very little support from the state or so being sick or having an illness is a constant of conversation. So these people were described, these Tío Pumé, which were spirit-like beings, they were described as people who never fell ill. They were always healthy, and they didn't have to work, they had everything given to them. And so all of these topics that are problematic, for the Pumé, they didn't have these problems, right? And then these water spirits, who are the owners of the freshwater fauna, came and annihilated these people, this Pumé, this Tío Pumé. And they had to go to a land that is no longer here, and it's the land of the dead now, where they live. So to go to this land that I think is what we call the past, because only the ancestors and the dead live there. During the Tonhe, the singers, they go to this land, which they describe as being very far away. They insist on this. And they actually, so most of my interviews were about phenomenological accounts of singing, what it feels to sing and what it means, like bodily speaking, like how they feel and what they see and what they experience with their bodies. And it was always, movement was part of this, right? I go and travel and to this land, to this place, which was also described as a city, like the underwater cities of the water spirits. And most of the men with whom I talked, they were like pointing to, I go there and it's far away, right? Exactly. And then I thought, okay, this is maybe the same that we talked about, very similar. And then it comes the sensorial part of this, right? And I think we have talked about this before, that this historical distance, how it's put in the terms of the historian is like a visual metaphor, right? So we think of a space as something that we can see and or is tangible, whereas the Pumé universe, I think, is more oral because they can travel to this by singing, and sounds somehow move them or make them shorten this distance between them and their ancestors and their dead ones, the loved ones who died. They travel by making sounds, and so I think this is also a very common idea in the lowlands, that the universe or space is not visual but made of sounds. I don't think they are alone in this. And yeah, so that was basically at the end, one of my conclusions was that they did have something equivalent to what we call historical distance, but maybe accuracy or this neutrality or being objective is not their concern. Or also it's not their concern thinking about the past as something that they cannot revisit and maybe change according to the present, which I think we agree now that this is also our case, that history is not objective, and history and it's very it's reshaped or being reshaped by the present circumstances. And
certainly the practice itself of historiography is a dynamic process, and what we choose to highlight, how we choose to focus on this, things like women seem absent from large bits of history, in professional history, maybe not, popular history always, but certainly in professional history. And then all of a sudden they reappear because this has become a societal focus again, that, we've been ignoring half the population.
Yes,
and
exactly.
Effectively, we also go back to the past, tweak it, reimagine it, and sort of package it for our societal consumption. Now, this is, I'm sure, different from the Pumé case in the technicalities, but there's some kind of analogy there with our traditions as well, as you say.
Yes, I think we have reconsidered a lot of our assumptions, and not only in history, and I say professional history or Western historiography or history as discipline, as we are also reconsidering most of our assumptions, most of our disciplines. So, and I think what is interesting is and maybe I am again talking through my ethno scientist self, that I want always to validate maybe these forms of historical consciousness or modes of historical consciousness by using categories that are known or familiar to us, right? Maybe this is not so nice of me to do, but it's a way for me to make sense of, to understand and to be able to explain this enormous amount of data that I had, and this, yes, this was a way to understand also, because I am very interested in sensory anthropology and understand how maybe indigenous epistemologies are shaped by these other ways of relating, sensually speaking, to matter, or to the tangible, right? To the world. and how these senses can shape so much how we conceive the world or our cosmos, or even to transform it into different ontologies. But it's really our way of learning through different senses and how to relate to the world. I feel like this makes a completely different perspective on the world without calling that another reality, right? Because the senses can restrict or can open many different worlds for many people. And yes, I was very interested in that, and I am still, and I had a lot of on that as well, and other topics. And historical distance was because I had read this book by Johannes Fabian, Time and the Other, and how vision plays a huge role in how we talk about time and how we deny evilness to the indigenous people around the world, based on these visual root metaphors that we use. Exactly. So, yeah.
Well, very interesting. I think that is a good time to then bring it all back and ask how, how would you suggest or encourage perhaps people coming up through new generations of scientists through the university system or elsewhere to start learning about this, maybe even do similar work? Is it something that people can go and do? For instance, are the Pumé receptive to being worked with in this way by other people?
I think that we need to keep reconsidering our assumptions. I think we have to rethink a lot of our behaviors and ways of approaching others than nature. And I think we have a lot of things to learn from peoples in the lowlands of South America. So I think it's fascinating. And I think we believe we know a lot about them, but there is so much more to learn and from them and to know. I think I have done field research, and I still think that I know 5% of what I could know from the Pumé and their cosmologies and their ways of relating to the world. And I think the Pumé people are very open to others. But at the same time, I remember I was there when there was this people from the Nature Conservancy doing research, and they were doing research with the Cuiva, who are Wahibu speaking people, and with the Pumé, and they were always complaining to me, like, how can you make them talk? Because they are so quiet all the time, whereas the Cuiva are all the time talking and very active. I think that would be challenging for someone wanting to do research with the Pumé people at the beginning, because it's true, they are not very talkative. They're very contemplative, I would say. But I would advise them to be patient, and because once they open up, it's really endless what they can say. And it's very beautiful and very important for us at this moment in our history.
Well, that all sounds wonderful. I wish you the best of luck with all future endeavors, and indeed good luck to anyone else who would like to also study such things, as you said, not to give up immediately, but to keep pressing on. And thank you to all of you who have been listening with open ears and open minds to this conversation. I thank you all heartily, and special thanks to our guest for today,
Thank you.
Silvana Saturno. And we will be back with more episodes as they happen soon enough. Thanks so much. Take care.
Thank you.